In the enigmatic depths of existence, beyond the veil of the known, lies a vast realm of mysteries and revelations that have captivated humanity since the dawn of time. It is within this ethereal domain, where science and spirituality converge in a cosmic dance, that the essence of the work before you takes shape. Welcome to Returning to Life, an auditory journey that explores the edges of immortality and reincarnation, guided by the master of spiritist philosophy, Allan Kardec. Here, the questions that have haunted thinkers and seekers of truth for centuries find profound, illuminating answers. What awaits us when the curtain of earthly life lifts? How does our existence transform when we cross the invisible boundary between life and death? As you journey through these pages, you'll be transported to a world where the limits of the tangible dissolve and the lines between the material and spiritual worlds blur. Imagine a universe where the soul, eternal and resilient, journeys through time, learning from the past and shaping the future. Allan Kardec, a pioneer in spiritism, reveals the hidden truths of reincarnation and the continuity of life with prose that blends intellectual depth and spiritual insight. With each chapter, Returning to Life uncovers the profound truths of our eternal journey, inviting you to question, reflect, and discover a new understanding of your own existence. Prepare to embark on a journey that will challenge your views of life and death and offer a transformative vision of the universe and your place within it. Open your mind and heart and surrender to the wonder and mystery of returning to life. The journey toward immortality begins now. Spiritual life, wandering spirits and transitory worlds, perceptions, sensations, and sufferings of spirits. A theoretical essay on the sensation of spirits. Choice of trials. Relations beyond the grave. Sympathy and antipathy. Relations of spirits. Eternal halves. Memory of bodily existence and commemoration of the dead. Funerals. Wandering spirits. Does the soul reincarnate immediately after the separation from the body? Sometimes it is immediate, but more often it occurs after more or less long intervals. In higher worlds, reincarnation is almost always immediate. Being less gross, the embodied spirit enjoys almost all its spiritual faculties, its normal state being that of its lucid somnambulists. What happens to the soul in the interval between incarnations? The wandering spirit that aspires to a new destiny dedicates itself to waiting. How long can these intervals last? From a few hours to several thousand centuries. On the other hand, there is no specific limit assigned to the waiting state, which can extend for a long time. However, it is never perpetual. The spirit always remembers sooner or later that it must start a new existence to purify its previous existences. This time is subject to the will of the spirit, or can be imposed as an expiation. It is a consequence of free will. Spirits know perfectly well what they are doing, but some also see it as a punishment imposed by God. There are also others who request to extend it to pursue studies that can only be successfully completed in the state of mind. Is wandering itself a sign of inferiority of spirit? No, because there are wandering spirits of all degrees. Incarnation is a transitory state, as we have said, and in its normal state, the spirit is always free from matter. It can be said that all spirits who are not incarnated are wandering. Those who are to reincarnate, yes, but pure spirits who have attained perfection are not wandering. It is already their final state. As for their inner qualities, spirits are of different orders or degrees, passing successively through each as they purify themselves. In state, they can be incarnated, that is, united with a body, or wandering, that is, free from the material body and waiting for a new one to perfect themselves. Finally, there are pure spirits, that is, perfect and in no need of incarnation. How do wandering spirits educate themselves? Do they do it the same way we do? They study their past and seek ways to elevate themselves. They see and observe what happens in the places they visit, listen to the speeches of enlightened men and the opinions of spirits higher than themselves. This brings them ideas they did not have before. Do spirits retain some human passions? Elevated spirits, upon shedding their material envelope, leave behind the bad passions and retain only those of good. But lower spirits retain them, for if it were otherwise, they would already be spirits of the highest order. Why do spirits, upon leaving earth, not leave all their bad passions behind. There are people in this world who are excessively jealous. Do you believe that by leaving, they lose this flaw? After leaving here, especially for those who had strong passions, there remains a sort of atmosphere that envelops and retains them with all these evils. For the spirit is not entirely free and can only glimpse the truth and thereby the right path. Does the spirit progress while it is in a wandering state? It can make significant progress, always according to its will and desire, but it is exclusively in corporeal existence that it can put into practice the new ideas it has acquired. Are wandering spirits happy or unhappy? It varies according to their merit. Some suffer from the passions they could not detach from at first, while others are happy according to their degree of disincarnation. During the wandering state, the spirit perceives what it lacks to be happier, and then seeks ways to attain it. However, it is not always allowed to reincarnate at will, which becomes a form of punishment. Can wandering spirits go to all worlds? When a spirit has left its body, it is not completely freed from matter. It still belongs to the world in which it lived, or to a world of the same degree. Unless, during its life, it has elevated itself, the latter being the goal to which every spirit should aspire. Otherwise, they could never perfect themselves. Although in a wandering state a spirit can go to certain higher worlds, it is as if it were a stranger there, as, so to speak, it has only a limited view of them. This creates in it a desire to improve to become worthy of the bliss appreciated in higher worlds, where it may later reside. Do already purified spirits visit lower worlds? Often they go there to help others progress. Otherwise, these worlds would remain alone without a guide to direct them. Transitory worlds. As has been said, there are worlds that serve as stations and resting places for wandering spirits. Yes, there are worlds specifically assigned to wandering beings, worlds where they can temporarily reside. These are like bivouacs, a camp for resting from prolonged wandering, as this state is always somewhat uncomfortable. They are intermediate positions between other worlds, graded according to the nature of the spirits that can go there. In these worlds they enjoy a medium level of well-being. Can spirits living in these worlds leave at will? Yes, spirits in these worlds can leave them to go where they must. Think of them as birds migrating south, which, on their way, stop on an island to regain the strength needed to reach their destination. Do spirits progress during their stay in transitory worlds? Certainly. If they gather in this way, it is to learn what will allow them to obtain permission more easily in the long term to go to better places and achieve the position of the elect. Are transitory worlds perpetually and by their special nature assigned to wandering spirits? No, their position is only temporary. Are these worlds also inhabited by corporeal beings? No, their surface is barren, as those who inhabit them do not need anything. This barrenness is permanent and due to their special nature. Are they not barren in transition? These worlds are then devoid of natural beauty. For them, nature is expressed in the grandeur of immensity, which is truly no less admirable than what you call natural beauty. Since the state of these worlds is transitory, is our earth part of it? It was. When did this happen? During its formation. Nothing is useless in nature. Everything has its purpose, its destiny. Nothing is empty, because everything is inhabited, and life is everywhere. Thus, during the long series of centuries that elapsed before the appearance of man on Earth, during these long periods of transformation evidenced by geological layers, even before the formation of the first organic beings, in this shapeless mass, in this arid chaos where the elements blended, there was no absence of life. Beings that did not have our needs or physical sensations found refuge there. God wanted that, even in this imperfect state, Earth serve some purpose. Who would dare to say that among the billions of worlds circulating in the vastness, only one of the smallest, lost in the multitude, had the exclusive privilege of being inhabited? What would be the purpose of the others? Would God have made them merely for the pleasure of our eyes? It is an absurd assumption, incompatible with the wisdom evident in all its works, and unacceptable when we consider all those we cannot see. No one would dispute that there is something grand and sublime in the idea of worlds still unfit for material life, but nonetheless populated by beings suited to that environment. Perceptions, sensations, and sufferings of spirits. Once in the spirit world, does the soul continue to have the same perceptions it had while living? Yes, it also acquires new ones that it did not possess before, because its body was like a veil that obscured them. Intelligence is an attribute of the spirit, but it manifests more freely when it is not bound by the chains of matter. The perceptions and knowledge of spirits are indefinite, meaning they know all things. The closer they are to perfection, the more they know. Superior spirits know a great deal, while inferior spirits are more or less ignorant of things. Do spirits know the principles of things? This depends on their elevation and purity. Inferior spirits do not know more than humans do. Do spirits understand time as we do? No, and that is why they do not always understand us when it comes to setting dates or schedules. Spirits live outside the time as we understand it. Duration for them is, so to speak, nullified, and centuries, so long for us, are to them merely moments that fade into eternity, much like how the inequalities of the ground blend and disappear for one who ascends into space. Do spirits have a more precise and accurate idea of the present than we do? Just as one who sees clearly has a more accurate idea of things than the blind person, spirits see what you do not see and therefore judge differently from you. But again, this depends on their elevation. How do spirits know about the past? Is this knowledge unlimited for them? The past, when dealt with by them, is a present, just as when you recall something that marked you during your exile. But since we no longer have the material veil that obscures your intelligence, we remember things that fade from your view. However, spirits do not know everything from their creation. Do spirits know the future? This again depends on their perfection. Often they only partially foresee it and are not always permitted to reveal it. When they do see it, it appears like the present. The spirit sees the future more clearly as it approaches God. After death, the soul sees and encompasses in one glance its past migrations, but cannot see what God has in store for it. For that, it must be entirely with Him. After many existences, spirits who have reached absolute perfection have complete knowledge of the future. Complete is not quite the word, only the wisdom of God is perfect, for He is the sovereign master, and no one can equal Him. Do spirits see God? Only superior spirits see and understand Him. Inferior ones sense and guess Him. When an inferior spirit says that God forbids or allows something, how does it know that it comes from Him? It does not see God but senses His sovereignty, and when something should not be done or a word should not be spoken, it feels an intuition, an invisible warning not to do it. Do you not have your own premonitions which are like secret warnings to do or not do something? It is the same for us, but to a higher degree, as the essence of spirits, being more subtle than yours, can better receive divine warnings. Is the order conveyed directly by God or through other spirits? It does not come directly from God, for one must be worthy to communicate with Him. God conveys His orders through superior spirits, who are perfected in both instruction and purity. Is the vision of spirits restricted as it is for corporeal beings? No, it does not reside in them. Do spirits need light to see? They see by themselves and do not need external light. For them, there is no darkness, except that in which they might find themselves for atonement. Do spirits need to transport themselves to see in two different places? Can they, for example, see simultaneously in two hemispheres of the globe? Since a spirit travels at the speed of thought, one could say that it sees everywhere at once. Its thought can radiate and be present simultaneously at several different points, but this ability depends on its purity. The more refined a spirit is, the vaster its vision. Only superior spirits can encompass everything. The faculty of sight in spirits is an inherent property of their nature, residing in their entire being, like light residing everywhere in a luminous body. It is a kind of universal lucidity that extends to everything, encompassing both space, time, and things, and for which there are neither darkness nor material obstacles. For humans, sight is produced by the action of an organ struck by light. Without light, they are in darkness. For a spirit, since the faculty of sight is an attribute of itself, independent of any external agent, sight is independent of light. Does the spirit see things as clearly as we do? More clearly, for its vision penetrates what you cannot penetrate, and nothing obscures it. Does the spirit perceive sounds? Yes, and it perceives things that your dull senses cannot detect. The faculty of hearing, like that of seeing, is spread throughout its being. All perceptions are attributes of the spirit, and are part of its essence. When it is clad in a material body, these perceptions reach it only through the organs, but in a state of spiritual freedom, they are no longer focused. Since perceptions are attributes of the spirit itself, is it possible for a spirit to avoid seeing and hearing what it does not wish to? Generally, yes, especially for high-ranking spirits. However, imperfect spirits often see and hear what might be useful for their improvement despite their wishes. Are spirits sensitive to music? You refer to your music, which is compared to celestial music, just as the song of the savage is compared to a sweet melody. Nevertheless, vulgar spirits can experience some pleasure in listening to your music, as they cannot yet understand more sublime music. Music has infinite charms for spirits due to the development of their sensory qualities. I refer to celestial music, which is all that the spiritual imagination can conceive of as the most beautiful and sweetest. Are spirits sensitive to the beauties of nature? The beauties of nature on different worlds are so diverse that they are far from being all known. Spirits are sensitive to them according to their ability to appreciate and understand them. But for high spirits there are overall beauties, before which the detailed beauties fade, so to speak. Do spirits experience our physical needs and sufferings? They know them because they have endured them, but they do not experience them materially as you do. They are spirits. Do spirits feel fatigue and the need for rest? They cannot experience fatigue as you understand it and, therefore, do not need physical rest, since they do not have organs whose strength needs to be repaired. But the spirit rests in the sense that it is not in constant activity. Its action is entirely intellectual, and its rest is entirely moral, meaning there are times when its thought ceases to be as active and does not focus on a particular object. This is true rest, but it is not comparable to that of the material body. The type of fatigue that spirits can experience is proportional to their inferiority. The higher they are, the less they need rest. When a spirit says it suffers, what kind of suffering does it experience? A moral anguish that tortures it more painfully than physical suffering. Why then do spirits complain of suffering from cold or heat? It is often a comparison with which, for lack of a better expression, they convey their situation. When they remember their bodies, they experience a sort of impression, like when one removes a coat and believes they are still wearing it for some time afterward. Theoretical essay on the sensation of spirits. The body is the instrument of pain, and if it is not the main cause, it is at least the intermediate cause. The soul perceives this pain. This perception is the effect. Its memory can be very painful, but it cannot have any physical effect. Neither cold nor heat can disorganize the soul's tissues. The soul cannot freeze or burn. Do we not see every day that the memory or apprehension of physical pain produces the effect of reality, even causing death? Everyone knows that amputees feel pain in the limb that no longer exists. It is certainly not this limb that is the seat, or even the starting point, of the pain. The brain has retained the impression, that is all. Therefore, we can believe that there is something analogous regarding the sufferings of the spirit after death. A more detailed study of the perispirit, which plays such an important role in all spirit phenomena of vaporous or tangible appearances, of the state of the spirit at the time of death, of the frequent idea that it is still alive, of the poignant image of suicides, martyrs, individuals absorbed in material pleasures, and many other facts that have shed light on this issue and led to the explanations we summarize here. The perispirit is the link that binds the spirit to the matter of the body. It is extracted from the surrounding universal fluid. It is both electricity, magnetic fluid, and to a certain extent, inert matter. One could say it is the quintessence of matter. It is the principle of organic life, but not of intellectual life. Intellectual life is in the spirit. Moreover, it is the agent of external sensations. In the body, these sensations are localized by the organs that serve as a channel. Once the body is destroyed, sensations are general. That is why a spirit does not say it suffers more from the head than from the feet. It is also important not to confuse the sensations of the perispirit when it is independent with those of the body. We can only use the latter as a term of comparison and not as an analogy. Once freed from the body, spirits can suffer, but this suffering is not that of the body. However, it is not exclusively moral suffering, like remorse, since spirits complain of cold and heat. They do not suffer more in winter than in summer. The pain they experience is therefore not physical pain per se. It is a vague inner sensation that the spirit itself does not always fully understand, precisely because the pain is not localized and is not produced by external agents. It is more a memory than a reality, but still a painful memory. However, sometimes there is something more than a memory, as we will see later. Experience teaches us that at the moment of death, the perispirit detaches from the body more or less slowly. During the initial moments, the spirit does not understand its situation. It does not believe it is dead, but it feels alive, with its body beside it, and it knows that it is its own body, without understanding that it is separated from it. This state lasts as long as there is a link between the body and the perispirit. A suicide told us, "No, I am not dead," and added, "However, I feel as if worms are gnawing at me." Obviously, worms were not gnawing at the perispirit or the spirit, but only at the body. However, as the separation of the body and the perispirit was not complete, a sort of moral repercussion created the sensation of what was happening in the body. Repercussion may not be the right term, as it might suggest that the effect is too material. It was rather the vision of what was happening in his body, still linked to his perispirit, that created an illusion he took for reality. Therefore it was not a memory, since while alive he had not been eaten by worms. It was the sensation of the present moment. This demonstrates the deductions that can be made from facts when they are carefully observed. During life, the body receives external impressions and transmits them to the spirit through the perispirit, which likely constitutes what is called the nervous fluid. When the body is dead, it no longer feels anything, as there is no longer a spirit or perispirit. The perispirit, when freed from the body, experiences the sensation, but as it no longer receives it through a limited channel, it is general. Since the perispirit is actually only a transmitter, and the spirit is the one that has awareness, it follows that if a perispirit could exist without a spirit, it would feel no more than the dead body. Similarly, if the spirit did not have a perispirit, it would be inaccessible to all painful sensations. We know that as spirits purify themselves, their spiritual essence becomes more ethereal. Consequently, material influence decreases in proportion to the spirit's progress, meaning as the perispirit becomes less coarse. But one might argue, pleasant sensations are also transmitted to the spirit by the perispirit, just like unpleasant sensations. If the pure spirit is inaccessible to the former, it must be to the latter as well. The sound of our instruments and the scent of our flowers do not produce any impression on them. However, they experience sensations of an indescribable charm of which we have no idea, as in this domain we are as blind as we are to light. We know they exist, but by what means? There lies the limit of our science. We know there is a perfection of sensation, hearing and vision, that these faculties are attributes of the whole being and not, as in humans, of a part of the being. But by what means? That is what we do not know. Spirits themselves cannot account for this, as our language is not equipped to express ideas we do not have, just as the language of savages lacks terms to express our arts, sciences and philosophical doctrines. When we say that spirits are inaccessible to the impressions of our matter, we are referring to those very high spirits whose ethereal envelope has no equivalent here on earth. The same is not true for those whose perispirit is less dense, who perceive sounds and smells, but not through a limited part of the individual as they did while alive. It could be said that molecular vibrations are felt throughout their entire being, thus reaching a common sensorium, which is the spirit itself, although this occurs in a very different manner, and perhaps with a different impression, producing a modification in perception. Spirits hear the sound of our voice, but they understand us without the aid of speech, through the simple transmission of thought, which supports what we say. This penetration is easier the more dematerialized the spirit is. As for sight, It is independent of our light. The faculty of seeing is an essential attribute of the soul, for which there is no darkness, but it is more extensive, more penetrating in purified spirits. The soul or spirit thus possesses within itself the same faculties for all perceptions. In corporeal life, they are obscured by the coarseness of the organs. In extracorporeal life, they are less and less obscured in proportion to the purity of the semi-material envelope. This envelope, extracted from the surrounding medium, varies according to the nature of the worlds from one to another. Spirits change their envelopes in the same way that we change our clothes when moving from winter to summer or from the poles to the equator. The highest spirits, when they come to visit us, don the earthly perispirit, and from that moment on, their perceptions function like those of our ordinary spirits. However, whether they are lower or higher, they only feel and hear what they want to perceive and hear. Without sensory organs, they can make their perceptions active or null at will. The only thing they are compelled to listen to are the advices of good spirits. Their sight is always active, but they can make themselves invisible depending on their rank. They can hide from those who are inferior to them, but not from those who are superior. In the initial moments after death, a spirit's sight is always blurred and confused. It clears up as the spirit purifies itself and can achieve the same clarity as during life, independent of its ability to penetrate bodies that are opaque to us. As for its extension through indefinite space in the future and the past, it depends on the degree of purity and elevation of the spirit. This theory, one might say, is not very reassuring. We thought that once freed from our coarse envelope, the instrument of our pain, we would no longer suffer, and now we are told that we will continue to suffer in one way or another, which is no less painful. Alas, it is so. We may continue to suffer, and a lot, for a long time, but we can also cease to suffer as soon as we leave this corporeal life. The sufferings of this world are sometimes beyond our control, but many are the consequence of our will. If we trace their origin, we will see that most are the result of causes we could have avoided. How many evils and diseases are not due to the person himself through excesses, ambition, or passions? In a word, if man had always lived with sobriety, had never abused anything, had been simple in his tastes, modest in his desires, he would have spared himself many tribulations. The same applies to the spirit. The sufferings it endures are always the consequence of how it lived on earth. Certainly it will no longer have gout or rheumatism, but it will have other sufferings that are no better. We have seen that its sufferings are the result of the links that still exist between it and matter, and that the more it frees itself from the influence of matter, meaning the more it dematerializes, the less painful its sensations will be. It is up to it to free itself from this influence. When it masters its animal passions, has no hatred, envy, jealousy, or pride, and is not dominated by selfishness, by purifying its soul through good feelings, by doing good, by giving worldly things only the importance they deserve, then, even under its corporeal envelope, it will already be purified and freed from matter, and when it leaves this envelope, it will no longer be under its influence. The physical sufferings it has experienced will leave no painful memories or unpleasant impressions, as they only affected the body and not the spirit. It will be happy to have rid itself of them, and the tranquility of its conscience will free it from all moral suffering. We have interviewed thousands of these spirits, belonging to all ranks of society and all social positions. We have studied them at all stages of their spiritual life, from the moment they left their bodies, and we have followed them step by step in this afterlife, to observe the changes that occurred in them, in their ideas and sensations. In this sense, the most ordinary people have not been the least valuable subjects of study. We have always seen that sufferings are related to the conduct of those who suffer their consequences, and that this new existence is a source of ineffable happiness for those who have followed the right path. It follows that those who suffer do so willingly, and they can blame only themselves, both in the other world and in this one. Choice of trials. In the wandering state and before taking on a new corporeal existence, the spirit is aware of and foresees the things that will happen to it during life. It chooses for itself the kind of trials it wants to undergo, and this is where its free will lies. It is not God who imposes life's tribulations on it as a punishment. Nothing happens without God's permission, for he has established all the laws that govern the universe. In this case, it is better to ask why he made this law and not another. By giving the spirit the freedom of choice, he leaves it entirely responsible for its actions and their consequences. Nothing hinders its future. The path of good is its own, just as is the path of evil. Thus, if it succumbs, it has the consolation of knowing that all is not lost for it, and that God, in his goodness, gives it the freedom to correct what it has done wrong. Furthermore, it is important to distinguish between what is the will of God and what is the will of man. If danger threatens you, you did not create that danger. It is God who did. But you choose to expose yourself to it because you see it as a means of progress, and this God has permitted. If a spirit can choose the type of trial it will undergo, it follows that all the tribulations we experience in life have been foreseen and chosen by us. Not everything is exactly as it sounds, since it is not to say that you have chosen and planned every detail of what happens to you in the world, but that you have chosen the type of trial, and the details are a consequence of the position you find yourself in, and often also of your own actions. If a spirit wishes to be born among criminals, for example, it knows the consequences it will face, but it does not know all the specific acts it will perform. These acts are the effect of its will or free will. A spirit knows that by choosing a certain path, it will have to go through a certain type of struggle. It thus knows the nature of the vicissitudes it will encounter, but does not know whether it will be this event or that one. The specific events arise from circumstances and the force of things. Only the major events, those that influence destiny, are foreseen. If you take a path full of obstacles, you know that you will have to take great precautions as you are likely to fall, but you do not know where you will fall, and it is also possible that you may not fall if you are cautious enough. Therefore, if a tile falls on your head in the street, do not think it is predestined, as is commonly said. How can a spirit want to be born among people of bad character? It must be placed in an environment where it can face the trial in which it has failed. There must be an analogy between lives, because to combat the instinct of criminality, it must be among people of that kind. If there were no bad people on earth, a spirit would not find the environment necessary for certain trials. Should we complain about this? In reality, this is what happens in higher worlds where evil has no access. There only good spirits exist. Let us hope this happens soon on our earth. Must a spirit experience all sorts of temptations in the trials it undergoes to achieve perfection? That is, must it go through all circumstances that can provoke pride, jealousy, greed, sensuality, etc.? Certainly not, for you know that there are some who, from the beginning, take a path that frees them from many trials. But one who is led onto the wrong path faces all the dangers of that path. A spirit, for example, may ask for wealth and it may be granted. Then, depending on its character, it may become greedy or extravagant, selfish or generous, or ultimately indulge in all the pleasures of sensuality. But this does not mean it must necessarily go through all these inclinations. How can a simple, ignorant and inexperienced spirit at the start choose an existence knowingly and be responsible for that choice? God compensates for its inexperience by outlining the path it must follow, just as one does for a child from the cradle, but gradually leaves it the mastery of choice as its free will develops. It is then that they often stray by taking the wrong path if they do not heed the advice of good spirits. This can be called the fall of man. When a spirit enjoys its free will, does the choice of corporeal existence always depend exclusively on its will? Or can this existence be imposed by the will of God as an expiation? God knows how to wait. He does not hasten expiation. However, God can impose an existence on a spirit when, due to its inferiority or ill will, it is not capable of understanding what might be most beneficial for it. This happens when God sees that this existence can serve its purification and progress, while also providing expiation. Does a spirit make its choice immediately after death? No. Many believe in the eternity of punishments and think their choice is a punishment. What guides the spirit in choosing the trials it wants to undergo? It chooses those that can serve as expiation for it based on the nature of its faults and which will make it progress more rapidly. Some may therefore impose a life of misery and deprivation on themselves to endure it with courage, while others may wish to test themselves with the temptations of wealth and power, which are much more dangerous due to the abuse and misuse that can be made of them and the bad passions they develop. Others may want to test themselves with the struggles they face in contact with vice. If some spirits choose contact with vice as a trial, are there any who choose it out of sympathy or a desire to live in an environment that aligns with their tastes, or to indulge materially in material inclinations? Yes, there are certainly some who do, but this is only among those whose moral sense is not yet developed. The trial comes by itself. Those who suffer from it longer will eventually understand that indulging in brutal passions has deplorable consequences they will have to endure for a time that seems eternal to them. God may leave them in this state until they understand their fault and seek to atone for it through beneficial trials. Doesn't it seem natural to choose the least painful trials for oneself? Yes, for humans, but not for spirits. When a spirit is freed from matter, the illusion of pain ceases and it thinks differently. As long as a person is on earth and under the influence of carnal ideas, they only see the painful side of these trials, which is why it seems natural to choose those that, from their perspective, can be combined with material pleasures. But in the spiritual life, they compare these fleeting and coarse pleasures to the unalterable happiness they envision. What use are a few transient sufferings to them? A spirit can thus choose the harshest trial, and consequently the most painful existence, in the hope of reaching a better state more quickly, just as a patient often chooses the most disagreeable remedy to heal faster. One who wishes to associate their name with the discovery of an unknown country does not choose a flowery path. They are aware of the dangers, but also the glory awaiting them if they succeed. The doctrine of freedom in choosing our life and the trials we must go through no longer seems extraordinary when considering that spirits freed from matter appreciate things differently than we do. After each existence, they see the progress they have made and understand what they still lack in purity to reach a state of perfection. Thus, they voluntarily submit to all the vicissitudes of corporeal life, requesting for themselves those trials that can make them progress the most quickly. Therefore, it is erroneous to be surprised that the spirit does not prefer the sweetest existence. It cannot enjoy this life without bitterness due to its imperfect state. It anticipates this, and to achieve it, seeks to improve itself. Do we not see examples of this type of choice every day? The person who works tirelessly for part of their life to amass resources for their well-being is imposing a task upon themselves for the sake of a better future. The soldier who volunteers for a dangerous mission, the traveler who faces significant perils in the interest of science or their fortune, are they not undergoing voluntary trials that should bring them honor and profit if they succeed? Are they not submitting themselves and exposing themselves for personal interest or glory? Are competitions not also voluntary trials one accepts to climb the ladder of their chosen career? One cannot achieve a transcendent social position in sciences, arts, or industry without going through a series of lower positions, which are trials in themselves. Human life is a reflection of spiritual life. We find all the same events on a smaller scale. If in life we often choose the most difficult trials with a higher goal in mind, why would the spirit, which sees beyond the body and for whom corporeal life is just a fleeting incident, not choose a painful and laborious existence if it leads to eternal happiness? Those who say that if humans could choose their existence, they would ask to be a prince or a millionaire, are like the short-sighted who only see what they touch, or like greedy children who, when asked what profession they prefer, answer pastry chef or confectioner. Thus, the traveler who, at the bottom of a valley obscured by fog, does not see the length or the ends of their path, when they reach the top of the mountain, sees the path they have traveled and the one that remains. They see their goal and the obstacles they still need to overcome, and can then plan with greater certainty how to reach it. The incarnate spirit is like the traveler at the base of the mountain, freed from earthly ties. It sees like one who is at the summit. For the traveler, the goal is rest after fatigue. For the spirit, it is supreme happiness after tribulations and trials. All spirits say that, In their wandering state, they seek, study, and observe to make their choice. Do we not have an example of this in corporeal life? Do we not often spend years searching for the career we freely choose because we believe it is the most suitable for opening a path for us? If we fail in one, we seek another. Each career we undertake is a phase, a period of life. We do not spend each day seeking what we will do the next day. Now, what are the different corporeal existences of a spirit, if not phases, periods, days for its spiritual life, which, as we know, is its normal life, since corporeal life is merely transient and fleeting? Could the spirit make its choice while in the corporeal state? Its desires may influence the choice, depending on the intention, but when the spirit is freed, it tends to see things very differently. Only the spirit makes the choice, but it can also do so within this material life. Indeed, the spirit always has moments when it is independent of the matter it inhabits. Many people desire greatness and wealth, and certainly this is not as a form of atonement or trial. It is undeniable that it is the matter that desires this greatness to enjoy it, and it is the spirit that desires it to experience its vicissitudes. Must the spirit constantly undergo trials until it achieves a state of perfect purity? Yes, but these are not the material trials generally understood by the term tribulations. A spirit that has reached a certain degree of perfection, without being perfect, only has to endure suffering, but it also has duties that help it to perfect itself, which are not at all painful for it, but are meant to assist others in their progress. Can the spirit evaluate the effectiveness of the trial it chooses? It may choose a trial that is beyond its strength and fail in the process. It may also choose a trial that is of no benefit to it, as if seeking a life of idleness and futility. But then, once it returns to the spirit world, it will discover that it has accomplished nothing and may seek compensation for the time lost. What happens with people's vocations and their disposition to follow one career over another? It seems to me that you can answer this question yourselves. Isn't it the consequence of all that we have said about the choice of trials and the progress made in a previous existence? In the wandering state, the spirit studies the various conditions in which it can progress and how it believes it can do so, for example, by being born among cannibalistic peoples. It is not advanced spirits that are born among cannibals, but spirits of the nature of cannibals, or inferior spirits. We know that our anthropophagies are not at the lowest level of the scale, and that there are worlds where brutality and ferocity have no equivalent on earth. These spirits are therefore still inferior to the lowest in our world, and coming among our savages represents progress for them, just as it would be progress for our anthropophagies to practice a profession here that would require them to shed blood. If they do not aim higher, it is because their moral inferiority does not allow them to understand a more complete progress. A spirit can only advance gradually. It cannot leap across the chasm that separates barbarism from civilization, and this is where we see one of the necessities of reincarnation, which is truly in accordance with divine justice. Otherwise, what would become of the millions of beings who die every day in the most degraded state if they did not have the means to achieve superiority? Why would God deprive some of his blessings granted to others? Could spirits from a lower or very backward world, like cannibals, be born among our civilized peoples? Yes, some may err in trying to ascend too high, but then they are out of place among you, as they have a morality and instincts that conflict with yours. These beings present the sad spectacle of ferocity amidst civilization. Returning among the cannibals would not be a decline. They would simply occupy their place and perhaps regain their dignity. Could a person from a civilized race reincarnate into a wild race as a form of atonement? Yes, but it depends on the type of atonement. A master who has been harsh with his slaves might become a slave himself and suffer from the mistreatment he inflicted. One who once commanded might, in a new existence, have to obey the same people he once dominated. This is atonement if he abused his power, and God can impose it. A good spirit might also, to advance certain others, choose an influential existence among these peoples. Thus, it has a mission of interworldly relations. Different orders of spirits establish a hierarchy of powers among themselves. There is a subordination and authority among them, yes, and a very great one. Spirits have authority over others based on their superiority, and they exercise it through an irresistible moral ascendance. Can inferior spirits escape the authority of those superior to them? I said irresistible. The power and consideration a person enjoyed on earth confer supremacy in the spiritual world, not because the humble will be exalted and the great humiliated. Read the Psalms. How should we understand this elevation and fall? Do you not know that spirits are of different orders according to their merit? Well, the greatest on earth can be at the last rank among spirits, while their servant might be at the first. Do you understand this? Did not Jesus say, "He who humbles himself will be exalted, and he who exalts himself will be humbled"? One who was great on earth and is found to be inferior among spirits often feels humiliation, especially if he was proud and envious. The soldier who, after battle, encounters his general in the spirit world follows him, recognizing him as superior. Title means nothing. Real superiority is everything. Do spirits of different orders blend together? Yes and no. That is, they can see each other but distinguish themselves from one another, moving away or drawing closer, depending on the similarity or antipathy of their feelings, much like what happens among humans. It is a whole world of which yours is a darkened reflection. Spirits of the same rank group together by a sort of affinity and form groups or families of spirits, united by sympathy and the goals they pursue. The good by their desire to do good, the bad by their desire to do evil, by the shame of their faults, and by the necessity of being among similar beings. It is like a large city where people of all ranks and conditions see and meet each other without blending, where societies form based on the analogy of tastes, where vice and virtue exist side by side without interacting. Can all spirits have reciprocal access to each other? The good spirits can go anywhere, and it is necessary for them to do so in order to exert their influence on the bad. But the regions inhabited by the good are closed to imperfect spirits, to prevent them from bringing disturbances caused by bad passions. What is the nature of the relationship between good and bad spirits? The good try to combat the bad tendencies of others to help them rise in their mission, as inferior spirits delight in leading us towards evil out of jealousy for not having deserved to be among the good. Their desire is to prevent inexperienced spirits from achieving the supreme good. They want others to experience what they themselves feel. Do you not see this among you as well? How do spirits communicate with each other? They see and understand each other. Speech is material. It is a reflection of the spirit. The universal fluid establishes constant communication between them. It is the vehicle for the transmission of thought, just as air is the vehicle for sound to you. It functions like a sort of universal telegraph that connects all worlds and allows spirits to understand each other from one world to another. Can spirits hide their thoughts from one another? Can they conceal themselves? No. For them, everything is revealed, especially when they are perfect. They can distance themselves, but they always see each other. However, this is not an absolute rule, as some spirits may make themselves invisible to others if they believe it is useful. How do spirits, who no longer have bodies, establish their individuality and distinguish themselves from other spiritual beings around them? They recognize their individuality through the perispirit, which makes them distinct from one another, just as the body does among humans. Spirits recognize each other from having lived together on earth. The son recognizes his father, the friend recognizes his friend, and so on, from generation to generation. How do spirits recognize people they knew on earth in the spiritual world? We see our past life and read it like a book, seeing the past of our friends and enemies, recognizing their journey from life to death. The soul, upon leaving its mortal remains, immediately sees its close ones and friends who have preceded it into the spirit world. Immediately may not always be the right term, as we have said, it takes some time to recognize and for the material veil to dissipate. How is the soul received upon its return to the spirit world? The soul of the righteous is received like a beloved brother, long awaited. The soul of the wrongdoer is received like a despised being. What feelings do impure spirits have when another evil spirit approaches them? The malevolent spirits are content to converse with spirits like themselves and remain deprived of infinite bliss, just as a scoundrel among his peers on earth. Do our relatives and friends sometimes come to welcome us when we leave Earth? Yes, they come to meet the soul they love, congratulate it as if it had returned from a journey, if it has escaped the dangers of the path, and help it free itself from corporeal attachments. It is a favor for good spirits when those attached to them come to meet them. Meanwhile, one who is contaminated remains isolated, or groups only with spirits similar to him. This is his punishment. Do parents and friends remain together after death? It depends on their elevation and the path they follow for their progress. If one of them is more advanced and progresses faster than the other, they cannot stay together. They may sometimes see each other, but they will not remain together forever until they can walk side by side or have reached equality in perfection. And there is also the deprivation of seeing parents and friends as a form of punishment. Are the sympathetic and antipathetic relationships between spirits eternal? Besides the general sympathy of resemblance, spirits have particular affections among themselves, yes, just like humans. But the bond that unites spirits is stronger when the body is absent, since it is no longer exposed to the vicissitudes of passions. Do spirits hold grudges against each other? There are grudges only among impure spirits, and it is they who incite enmities and dissensions among you. Two beings who were enemies on earth will retain mutual resentment in the spirit world. They will not understand that their hatred was foolish and childish. Only imperfect spirits hold on to some animosity until they are purified. If the separation between them was due only to material interests, they will no longer think about it once they disincarnate. If there is no antipathy between them, as the cause of discord no longer exists, they can happily reunite. This is similar to two individuals who reach the age of reason and recognize the futility of childhood quarrels, ceasing to blame each other. Does the memory of the wrongs that two people may have done to each other constitute an obstacle to their sympathy after death? Yes. If they are good, they forgive according to your repentance. If they are bad, they may hold on to resentment and sometimes pursue you in another existence. God may permit this as punishment. Are the individual affections of spirits subject to alteration? No, because they can no longer deceive themselves. They no longer have the mask behind which hypocrites hide. That is why their effects are unalterable when they are pure. The love that unites them represents for them the source of supreme happiness. Does the affection that two beings manifested on earth continue in the spirit world? Yes, undeniably, if it is based on genuine sympathy. But if physical causes have greater importance than sympathy, the latter ceases with the cause. Effects between spirits are more solid and lasting than on earth, as they are not subject to the whims of material interests and self-love. Are souls destined to reunite, predestined to this union from their origin? Yes, each one of us has somewhere in the universe its other half to which it will ultimately join. There is no specific and definitive union between two souls. The union exists among all spirits, but at different degrees depending on the rank they occupy, that is, according to the perfection they have attained. The more perfect they are, the more united they are. Discord gives rise to all human ills. Concord results in complete happiness. In what sense should we understand the term half used by some spirits to refer to sympathetic spirits? The expression is inaccurate. If a spirit were the half of another, separated from it, it would be incomplete. Two perfectly sympathetic spirits once united are so for all eternity, or they may separate and unite with other spirits. All spirits are united with each other. I am referring here to those who have achieved perfection in the lower spheres. When a spirit ascends, it no longer has the same sympathy for those it has left behind. Do two sympathetic spirits complement each other? Yes, this sympathy results from a perfect identity. The sympathy that draws one spirit towards another is the result of a perfect concordance of their inclinations and instincts. If one were to complement the other, it would lose its individuality. The identity necessary for perfect sympathy consists solely in the similarity of thoughts, feelings, or uniformity of knowledge acquired at equivalent levels of elevation. Can spirits who are sympathetic today become less so later? Yes, everything transforms. Thus, a spirit currently in a lower sphere, by perfecting itself, will reach the sphere where a particular spirit resides. Their meeting will occur more quickly if the superior spirit, unable to endure the trials it has faced, remains in the same state. Can two sympathetic spirits cease to be so? Certainly, if one of them becomes lazy. The theory of eternal halves is a figure of speech that describes the union of two sympathetic spirits. It is an expression even used in everyday language and should not be taken literally. Spirits who have used this term certainly do not belong to the highest order. The realm of their ideas is necessarily limited, and they may have expressed their thoughts in terms they would have used during their corporeal life. Thus, it is necessary to reject the idea that two spirits created for each other must eventually reunite in eternity after being separated for a more or less long period in memory of a corporeal existence. Does a spirit remember its corporeal existence? Yes, that is, after having lived many times as a human, it remembers what it was, and I assure you that sometimes it laughs with difficulty at itself, like a person who has reached the age of reason, and mocks the follies of their youth or childhood. The memory of corporeal existence appears to the spirit in a complete and sudden manner after death. It does not return gradually like something emerging from the mist. By focusing on it, the spirit recalls in detail all the events of its life, encompassing them in a retrospective view. It remembers things by the consequences they have on its current state of mind. However, there are circumstances in its life to which it attaches no importance and does not even try to remember. It could remember if it wanted to. It can recall the most minute details, whether events or even its thoughts. But when it is of no use, it does not do so. The spirit sees the purpose of earthly life in relation to the future life, understands the necessity of purification to reach the infinite, and knows that with each existence it leaves behind some impurities. How does the spirit remember past life in its memory? Is it through an effort of imagination or as an image before its eyes? Both. All acts that are of interest to recall appear to it as if they were present, while others are more or less lost in the variety of thoughts or completely forgotten. The more disincarnated the spirit is, the less importance it attaches to material things. Often, a wandering spirit that has just left Earth does not remember the names of the people it loved, or many details that seem important to you. These things matter little to it and fall into oblivion, but what it remembers very well are the main facts that help it progress. Does the spirit remember all the existences that preceded the last one it just left? All its past unfolds before it like the stages traveled by a traveler, but as we have said, it does not remember all its actions absolutely. It remembers them due to the influence they have on its current state. Concerning the earliest existences, those that can be considered the spirit's childhood, they are lost in the variety of time and disappear into the night of oblivion. How does the spirit see the body it has just left, as a bad habit that embarrassed it, which it is glad to be rid of? How did the decomposing body make it feel? Almost always with indifference, as if it were something that no longer interests it after a certain time. Does the spirit recognize bones or objects as if they had belonged to it? Sometimes this depends on the more or less elevated point of view from which it considers earthly things. The respect one has for the material objects belonging to the spirit draws its attention to those same objects, and it sees this respect with pleasure. The spirit always rejoices in the memory that is kept of it. Things preserved from it remind it, but it is the thought that draws it to you, not these objects. Do spirits retain the memory of the sufferings they endured during their last corporeal existence? Yes, often they retain them, and these memories make them feel more acutely the value of the happiness they can enjoy as spirits. Does a person who was happy here regret their pleasure once they have left Earth? Only inferior spirits can lament joys that align with the impurity of their nature and which they atone for with their sufferings. For elevated spirits, eternal happiness is 1,000 times preferable to the fleeting pleasures of earth, just as an adult despises what was pleasant in their childhood. Someone who started great works with a useful purpose and sees them interrupted by death regrets, having left them unfinished in the other world. On the contrary, they strive to influence other human spirits to continue them. Their goal on earth was the good of humanity. This goal remains the same in the spiritual world. People who have left works of art or literature retain the love for their works that they had in their lifetime, according to their elevation. They often judge them from a different perspective and frequently feel regret for what they admired the most. The spirit remains interested in the work done on earth, in the progress of the arts and sciences. This depends on its elevation or the mission it must accomplish. What seems magnificent to you is often very insignificant to some spirits. They admire it as a scholar admires the work of a student. They examine what can be supported by the elevation of incarnate spirits and their progress. Do spirits retain after death the love for their homeland? The principle remains the same for high-degree spirits. Their homeland is the universe. On earth, it is there that they find the most sympathetic people. The situation of spirits and their way of seeing things vary infinitely according to their degree of moral and intellectual development. High-order spirits generally remain on earth only for a short time. Everything that happens there is so insignificant in comparison with the grandeur of the infinite, and the things to which humans attach the greatest importance are so childish in their eyes that they find little attraction in them. Unless they are called to contribute to the progress of humanity, medium-order spirits remain there more frequently. Although they view things from a higher perspective than in life, they have retained more or less the same ideas, tastes, and inclinations they had while in their corporeal envelope. They mingle with our gatherings, our affairs, and our entertainments, participating more or less actively according to their character. Unable to satisfy their passions, they rejoice with those who please and excite them. Among them, some are more serious, observing and learning to improve themselves. Do spirits' ideas change with their state of mind? Sometimes they may hold the same ideas for a long time, but gradually, under the influence of matter, these ideas diminish, and they see things more clearly. It is then that they seek ways to improve themselves. Since the spirit has already lived in the spiritual life before its incarnation, what is the cause of its astonishment upon entering the spiritual world? It is only the effect of the initial moment of disturbance following awakening. Later, it recognizes itself perfectly as the memory of the past returns and the impression of earthly life fades away. Commemoration of the dead, funerals. Spirits are sensitive to the memory of those they loved on earth, much more than you might believe. This memory adds to their happiness, and they are happy. And if they are unhappy, it is a form of softening for them. Is there something more solemn for spirits than the day of the commemoration of the dead? They prepare to visit those who are going there and to pray over their remains. Spirits respond to the call of thought. This day is like any other day. It is a meeting for them with their graves. On that day they are more numerous around the graves because more people call out to them, but each of them comes only for their friends and not for the multitude of indifferent ones. In what form do they come, and how would we see them if they could become visible as they were during their lifetime? Forgotten spirits whose graves are visited by no one still go to their burials. However, they first feel the pain of having no friend to recall them, and what remains of earth is only held by the heart. If love is not present, there is nothing left to attach the spirit. Now, it has the whole universe for itself. A visit to the grave gives the spirit more satisfaction than a prayer at home. Visiting the tomb is a way to show that one is thinking of the absent spirit. It is the image. As I have said before, it is the prayer that sanctifies the act of remembrance, no matter where it is said, as long as it is done with the heart. Do the spirits of people for whom statues or monuments are erected attend these inaugurations? They see them with pleasure. Many come when they can, but they are less sensitive to the honor than to being remembered. What drives some people to want to be buried in one place rather than another? A desire to return to a place after death is a sign of the importance attached to a material thing, a mark of inferiority in the spirit. The affection of the spirit for certain places indicates a moral inferiority that makes a corner of the earth something important for the elevated spirit, which knows that its soul will reunite with those it loves, even if its bones are separated. The reunion of the remains of all the members of the same family is not a pious custom or a testimony of sympathy for those loved. If this reunion is of little importance to the spirits, it is useful for humans, as the memories are more gathered. Is the soul upon entering spiritual life sensitive to the honors paid to its mortal remains? When a spirit has reached a certain degree of perfection, It no longer has earthly vanity and understands the uselessness of all these things. But there are spirits who, at the time of their material death, rejoice in the honors paid to them or feel abandoned by the departure of their corporeal envelope, as they still retain some prejudices from this world. Does the spirit attend its funeral procession? Very often it does, but sometimes it does not realize what is happening if it continues to have issues. It feels flattered by the presence of attendees at its funeral procession, more or less depending on the sentiment it provides. Does the spirit of the deceased attend the meetings of its heirs? Almost always. God wills it for its own teaching and to punish the guilty. It is there that it judges the value of its protestations. All feelings are exposed, and the disappointment it feels seeing the ability of the heirs to divide the spoils makes it more enlightened about its own feelings. But their turn will come. The instinctive respect that humans show toward the dead, throughout all ages and among all peoples, is an effect of the intuition of future existence. It is the natural consequence. Without it, this respect would have no meaning. Return to corporeal life. Preliminary matters for return, union of soul and body, abortion, moral and intellectual faculties of man, influence of the organism, idiotism, madness, childhood, earthly sympathies and antipathies, forgetting the past, preliminary matters for return. Do spirits know when they will reincarnate? They sense it like the blind person senses heat. Those who approach it know that they must take on a body, just as you know you must die one day, but they do not know exactly when it will happen. Reincarnation is thus a necessity of spiritual life, just as death is a necessity of corporeal life. Thus, all spirits are concerned with their reincarnation. Some do not think about it at all, do not even understand it. It depends on their nature and its degree of progress. For some, the uncertainty of their future is a punishment. Can a spirit advance or delay the moment of its reincarnation? Can it bring it closer by calling it with its desires, or can it also push it away? It may hesitate before the trial, as among spirits there are also fearful or indifferent beings. But it does not do this without consequences. It suffers like someone who hesitates before a beneficial remedy that could cure them. If a spirit were fortunate enough to find itself in an intermediate condition between wandering spirits and had no ambition to rise, it could indefinitely prolong this state. No, not indefinitely. Advancement is a necessity that a spirit feels. Sooner or later all must ascend. It is their destiny. Is the union of the soul with a specific body predestined, or is it only chosen at the last moment? The spirit is always designated in advance. When a spirit chooses the trial it wishes to undergo, it asks to be incarnated. And God, who knows and sees all, knew and saw in advance that a particular soul would join a particular body. Does the spirit have the ability to choose the body into which it will enter, or only the type of life that will serve as its trial? It can also choose the body, as the imperfections of that body are trials for it that help in its advancement if it overcomes the obstacles it encounters. But this choice does not always depend on it. However, it can request it. Could the spirit at the last moment refuse to enter the body that was intended for it? If it refused, it would suffer much more than if it had attempted the trial. It might happen that a child about to be born does not find a spirit willing to incarnate in it. God would ensure that the child, when it becomes viable, always has a soul. Nothing is created without purpose. The union of the spirit with that body may be imposed by God, just like the various trials, especially when the spirit is not yet capable of choosing with full knowledge. As atonement, the spirit may be compelled to unite with the body of the child, who through its birth and the position it will hold in the world could reveal itself as a great punishment. If several spirits present themselves for the same body to be born, how is the choice made among them? Many may request it, but it is God who judges. In these cases, the one who is most capable of fulfilling the mission to which the child is destined is chosen. But as I have said, the spirit is designated before the moment it must unite with the body. The moment of incarnation is accompanied by a disturbance similar to that which occurs when leaving the body, but much greater and especially much longer. In dying, the spirit escapes from slavery. In being born, it returns to it. The moment when a spirit is about to incarnate is for it a serious or important act. It is like a traveler embarking on a dangerous journey, not knowing if they might find death in the waves. The traveler knows the dangers they face, but does not know if they will shipwreck. It is the same for the spirit. It knows the nature of the trials it is subjected to, but does not know if it will succumb. Just as the death of the body is a kind of rebirth for the spirit, reincarnation is for it a kind of death, or rather an exile and confinement. It leaves the world of spirits for the corporeal world, just as man leaves the corporeal world for the world of spirits. The spirit knows it will reincarnate just as man knows he will die, but just as man is not aware of this fact until the last moment, at the appointed time, a disturbance seizes it, similar to that of a person who is dying. This disturbance persists until the new existence clearly forms. The preparations for reincarnation are a sort of agony for the spirit. The uncertainty in which a spirit finds itself regarding the success of the trials it will undergo in life is a cause of anxiety for it, before its reincarnation, a very great anxiety, as the trials of its existence will delay or advance its progress, depending on how it has endured them. The spirit is accompanied by other friendly spirits who come to help it leave the world of spirits, just as they come to welcome it when it returns. This depends on the sphere the spirit inhabits. If it is in the spheres where affection prevails, the spirits that love it accompany it until the last moment, encourage it, and often even follow it in life. The friendly spirits who follow us in life are sometimes those we see in our dreams, who show us their affection and present themselves to us in unfamiliar forms. Very often it is they, as they come to visit us, as one would visit a prisoner in confinement. Union of the soul and the body. At what moment does the soul unite with the body? The union begins at conception, but is not complete until the moment of birth. From the moment of conception, the spirit designated to occupy a particular body attaches to it by a fluid bond that becomes increasingly tight until the child is born. The cry that escapes the child then announces that it is one of the living and a servant of God. Is the union between the spirit and the body definitive from the moment of conception or during this initial period? The union is definitive in the sense that another spirit cannot replace the one assigned to that body. However, as the bonds that connect it to the body are very weak, they can easily break and be severed by the will of the spirit, which might hesitate before the trial it has chosen. In such cases, the child does not survive. What happens to the spirit if the body it has chosen dies before birth? Does the spirit choose another body? What is the meaning of these premature deaths? The imperfections of matter are the most frequent cause of these deaths. What is the purpose of a spirit incarnating into a body that dies a few days after birth? The being does not have a sufficiently developed consciousness of its existence. The significance of death is almost null. As we have said, it is generally a trial for the parents. Does the spirit know in advance that the body it chooses has no chance of surviving? It sometimes knows, but if it chooses for this reason, it is because it is hesitant before the trial. When a spirit misses the incarnation for some reason, is it immediately compensated by another existence? Not always immediately. The spirit takes time to return to choosing unless instant reincarnation results from a prior determination. Once the spirit has united with the child's body, and there is no longer any reason to deny it, does it sometimes regret the decision it has made, just as a person might complain about the life they have and wish it were different? Yes, it does sometimes regret the decision, but it does not know that it has been chosen by another spirit. Once incarnated, the spirit cannot regret a choice of which it is not aware. However, it may find the burden too heavy, and if it believes it exceeds its strength, may then resort to suicide. During the interval between conception and birth, does the spirit enjoy all its faculties, more or less depending on the type, since it is not yet incarnated, but merely adhered? From the moment of conception, a disturbance begins to seize the spirit, which is thus alerted that it is time to take a new existence. This disturbance increases until birth. During this interval, is its state more or less that of an incarnated spirit during the body's sleep? As the moment of birth approaches, its ideas and memories of the past fade, and it loses consciousness of them as a human. Once it enters life, this memory gradually returns to it in its mental state. At the moment of birth, the spirit immediately regains the fullness of its faculties. They do not develop gradually with the organs. It is a new existence for it. It must learn to use its instruments. Ideas return to it gradually, like a man waking from a dream and finding himself in a different position from the day before. Since the union of the spirit and the body is complete and definitively consummated only after birth, can we consider that the fetus has a soul? The spirit destined to animate it exists, so to speak, outside of it. Therefore, it does not have a soul per se, since the incarnation is still in progress, but it is bound to what it is to possess. How can intrauterine life be explained? It is like that of a plant, vegetative. The child lives the animal life. Man possesses both animal and plant life within himself, which he completes at birth with spiritual life. Science indicates that there are children who, from the mother's womb, are not viable at birth. What is the purpose of this? It often happens. God allows it as a trial, either for the parents or for the spirit destined to take their place. Are there stillborn children who were destined for the incarnation of a spirit? Yes, some never had a spirit destined for their bodies. Nothing was meant to be realized for them. Thus, this child came only for the parents. Can a being of this nature come to term? Yes, sometimes, but then it does not live. Therefore, any child who survives birth necessarily has a spirit incarnated in it. Otherwise, it would not be a human being. What are the consequences of abortion for the spirit? It is a null existence, a restart. Is elective abortion a crime? Regardless of the time of conception, it is always a crime when it transgresses the law of God. The mother or anyone else always commits a crime by taking the life of the child before it is born, as it is to prevent the soul from enduring the trials for which the body was to be the instrument. In the case where the mother's life is in danger, due to the birth of the child, is it a crime to sacrifice the child to save the mother? It is preferable to sacrifice the being that does not exist, rather than the being that does. It is rational to treat the fetus with the same respect as the body of a living child. All this reveals the will of God and His work. Thus, do not take lightly the things that must be respected. Why not respect the works of creation, sometimes incomplete due to the will of the Creator? It is part of His design. No one is called to judge moral and intellectual faculties. Where does a person get their moral qualities, whether good or bad? They come from the spirit incarnating within them. The purer the spirit, the more inclined the person is towards good. It might seem to follow that a good person is the incarnation of a good spirit, and a vicious person is the incarnation of a bad spirit. Yes, but it would be more accurate to say that it is an imperfect spirit. Otherwise, one could believe in spirits that are always evil, what are called demons. What is the character of individuals in whom spirits of light incarnate? They can be disoriented, capricious, and sometimes even malevolent. Do spirits have passions that are not part of humanity? No, otherwise they would have made us aware of them. It is the same spirit that gives a person moral and intellectual qualities. Indeed, it is according to the degree to which the person has developed. A person does not have two spirits within them. Why are very intelligent people, which indicates a superior spirit in them, sometimes simultaneously deeply vicious? This is because the incarnated spirit is not sufficiently pure, and the person succumbs to the influence of other, worse spirits. The spirit progresses through a sensitive ascending process, but progress does not occur simultaneously in all directions. At one point, it may advance in science, and at another, in morality. What about the opinion that the various intellectual and moral faculties of a person are the result of many different spirits incarnated in them, each with a special attitude? Reflecting on this, we recognize that it is absurd. If a person were an amalgam of spirits, that will would not exist, and there would be no individuality for them, as at their death, all these spirits would be like a flock of birds escaping from a cage. Yet people often complain about not understanding certain things, and it is curious to see how they multiply difficulties while they have a very simple and natural explanation at their disposal. This is akin to confusing effect with cause, It is doing for humans what the pagans did for their gods. They believed in as many gods as there were phenomena in the universe, while sensible people saw in these phenomena only effects caused by a single god. The physical and moral worlds offer us many points of comparison on this subject. We once believed in the multiple existence of matter while stopping at the application of phenomena. Today, we understand that these varied phenomena could very well be modifications of a single elementary matter. The various difficulties are manifestations of the same cause, that of the soul or the incarnated spirit, and not of multiple souls, just as the different sounds of an organ are the product of a single type of air, rather than as many types of air as there are sounds. From this system, one could deduce that when a person loses or acquires certain attitudes or inclinations, it would be due to many spirits coming and going, which would make them a multiple being without individuality, and thus without responsibility. Furthermore, this would contradict the numerous examples of manifestations by which spirits prove their personality and identity. Influence of the organism. The spirit, in uniting with the body, becomes identified with the matter. Matter is only the envelope of the spirit, just as clothing is the envelope of the body. The spirit, in uniting with the body, retains the attributes of spiritual nature. The faculties of the spirit can be exercised freely after its union with the body. The exercise of these faculties depends on the organs that serve as instruments, and these organs are in turn weakened by the coarseness of matter. Accordingly, the material envelope would be an obstacle to the free manifestation of the spirit's faculties, like an opaque crystal impeding the free emission of light. Yes, and a very opaque obstacle. The action of the body's coarse matter on the spirit can be compared to that of murky water limiting the freedom of movement of a body immersed in it. The free exercise of the soul's faculties is subordinate to the development of the organs. The organs are the instruments of the manifestation of the soul's faculties. This manifestation is subject to the development and degree of perfection of these same organs, just as the quality of a work depends on the quality of the tool. From the influence of the organs, we can deduce a relationship between the development of the cerebral organs and that of the moral and intellectual faculties. One must not confuse effect with cause. The spirit always possesses its own faculties. It is not the organs that provide these faculties, but the faculties that stimulate the development of the organs. According to this, the diversity of attitudes in humans is due solely to the state of the spirit. The qualities of a spirit, which may be more or less advanced, are the principle behind this, but the influence of matter, which more or less impedes the exercise of its faculties, must also be considered. The spirit, when incarnating, brings certain predispositions, and we admit that each has a corresponding organ in the brain. The development of these organs is an effect and not a cause. If the faculties originated in the organs, a person would be a machine without free will and without responsibility for their actions. One would then have to admit that the greatest geniuses, scientists, poets, and artists are so only because chance gave them particular organs, implying that without these organs, they would not have been geniuses, and that the most foolish person could have been a Newton, a Virgil, or a Raphael if they had been endowed with certain organs. This position becomes even more absurd when applied to moral qualities. Thus, according to this system, St. Vincent de Paul, endowed by nature with a certain organ, could have been a scoundrel, and the greatest scoundrel would have lacked just one organ to become a St. Vincent de Paul. On the contrary, it must be admitted that special organs, if they exist, are consequences that develop through the exercise of the faculty, just as muscles develop through movement, and this is not irrational. Let's take a comparison that is trivial in its truth. Certain physiognomic signs reveal a person addicted to wine. Are these signs what make them drunk, or is it the drunkenness that gives rise to these signs? One can say that the organs receive the imprint of the faculties, idiocy and insanity. Is there something unreasonable in the opinion that fools and idiots have souls of inferior nature? They do not have a human soul, but often they are more intelligent than one might think, and they suffer from the inadequacy of the means they have to communicate, just as the world suffers from its inability to speak. What is the purpose of Providence in creating unfortunate beings like fools and idiots? They are punished spirits inhabiting the bodies of idiots. These spirits suffer due to the constraints they endure and the impotence with which they manifest through undeveloped or disturbed organs. Thus, it is not true that the organs do not influence the faculties. We have never said that organs have no influence. They have a very significant influence on the manifestation of the faculties, but they do not give the faculties. This is the difference. A good musician with a poor instrument does not play good music, but this does not prevent them from being a good musician. One must distinguish between the normal state and the pathological state. In the normal state, morality overcomes the obstacle imposed by matter. But there are cases where matter offers such resistance that manifestations are hindered or distorted, as in idiocy and insanity. These are pathological cases, and in this state, the soul does not enjoy full freedom, and the human law itself is freed from responsibility for its actions. What can be the merit of experience for beings like idiots and imbeciles, who cannot do good or evil, and thus cannot progress? It is an atonement imposed for the abuses that may have been made of certain faculties. It is a dead time. The body of an idiot may thus contain a spirit that would have animated a genius in a previous existence. Yes, genius sometimes turns into a curse when abused. Moral superiority is not always proportional to intellectual superiority, and the greatest geniuses may have much to express, which is why they often find their existence inferior to what they have already achieved, causing suffering. The obstacles an intellect encounters in its manifestations are like restraints compressing the movements of a vigorous person. One can say that the imbecile and the idiot are handicapped by the brain, just as the lame person is by the legs and the blind person by the eyes. Does the idiot in their state of mind have awareness of their mental condition? Yes, very often they understand that the chains preventing their growth are a trial and an atonement. What is the situation of the spirit in madness? A spirit, in its state of freedom, receives impressions directly and acts directly on matter. But when incarnated, it finds itself in very different conditions and must act solely through special organs. If one or all of these organs are affected, its action or impressions in this regard will be interrupted. If it loses its sight, it becomes blind. If it loses its hearing, it becomes deaf, etc. Imagine now that the organ governing the effects of intellect and will is partially or entirely affected or modified. It will be easy to understand that since the spirit has only incomplete or distorted organs at its disposal, this must cause a disturbance of which the spirit is perfectly aware internally, but has no control to stop its course. Thus, it is always the body, and not the spirit, that is disorganized. Yes, but one must not forget that just as a spirit acts on matter, matter reacts on it to a certain extent, and a spirit can be momentarily impressed by the alteration of the organs through which it manifests and receives impressions. It may happen that over the long term, when madness has persisted for a long time, the repetition of the same acts eventually influences the spirit, which does not fully liberate itself until it has completely separated from all material impressions. Because madness sometimes leads to suicide, the spirit suffers from the constraint it endures and the inability to manifest freely, which drives it to seek a means of breaking its chains through death. Does the spirit of the deceased feel the disruption of its faculties after death? It may feel the effects for a while after death, until it has completely freed itself from matter, much like a person who wakes up still feeling the consequences of a dream they were caught in. How can the alteration of the brain affect the spirit after death? It is a memory or a burden that predominates over the spirit, and since it did not understand everything that happened during its madness, it still takes some time to comprehend it. The spirit, once freed from the body, feels for some time the impression of the constraints from its early life. Is the spirit animating the body of a child as developed as that of an adult? It can be more developed if it has progressed further. It is the imperfect organs that prevent its manifestation. It acts through the means it has. In an infant, the spirit, in addition to the obstacle posed by the imperfection of the organs to its free manifestation, thus thinks like a child and not like an adult. As a baby, it is natural that the organs of intelligence, not being developed, cannot give it the full intuition of an adult. It has, in fact, very limited intelligence until age matures its reason. The disorder accompanying incarnation does not suddenly cease at birth. It gradually dissipates with the development of the organs. An observation supports this response. A child's dreams do not have the character of those of an adult. Their subject is almost always childish, indicating the nature of the spirit's concerns. When a child dies, does the spirit immediately regain its original energy? It must do so as it frees itself from its physical envelope. However, it only regains its original clarity when the separation is complete, that is, when there is no longer any link between the spirit and the body. Does the incarnated spirit suffer during its childhood from the constraint imposed by the imperfection of its organs? No, this state is necessary. It is part of nature, and according to the views of providence, it is a time of rest for the spirit. What is the purpose for the spirit to go through childhood? The spirit incarnates to perfect itself. It is more accessible during this period to the imperfections it receives, which can help it progress, with the aid of those responsible for its education. For the first sound of the baby is a cry to attract the mother's attention and prompt the necessary care for it. Do you not understand that if a child had only cries of joy while still unable to speak, we would not be very concerned about its needs? Therefore, admire all the wisdom of providence. Where does the change in character at a certain age, especially after adolescence, come from? Is it the spirit that changes? Is it the spirit that transcends its nature and reveals itself as it was? Do you not know the secret that children hide in their innocence? You do not know what they are, what they have been, or what they will be, and yet you love them, cherish them as if they were part of yourself, to the point that a mother's love for her children is reputed to be the greatest love one being can have for another. Where does this sweet love, this tender kindness that even strangers feel towards a child, come from? Do you know? What I am going to explain is this. Children are beings that God sends into new existences, and to avoid blaming him for excessive severity, he gives them all the appearances of innocence. Even in a child of bad nature, their wrongdoings are covered by the innocence of their actions. This innocence is not a real superiority over what they were before. It is not the image of what they will be, and if this is not the case, the punishment falls solely on them. But it is not only for them that God gave them this appearance, but also and especially for their parents, whose love is necessary for their weakness, and this love would be significantly weakened by encountering a gruff and surly character. By believing that their children are good and kind, parents give them all their affection and surround them with the most delicate care. But when children no longer need this protection, this help they have received for several years, their real and individual character reappears in all its nakedness. It remains good if it was fundamentally good, but it always reveals nuances that were hidden by early childhood. Thus, you see that God's ways are always the best, and when one is pure of heart, the explanation is easy to conceive. Indeed, consider that the spirit of children born among humans may come from a world where they had very different habits. What would you think if this new being were among you, with passions very different from your own, with inclinations and tastes completely opposed to yours? All thoughts, characters, and varieties of beings are shaped by the multitude of worlds in which creatures grow. And you yourselves, when you die, will find yourselves in a sort of childhood, amidst new siblings and in a new non-earthly existence, where you will be unfamiliar with the habits, customs, and relationships of this new world, struggling with a language you are not used to, a language more vivid than your current thoughts. The weakness of youth makes it flexible and receptive to the advice of experience and those who are meant to help it progress. It is then that it can reform its character and suppress its bad inclinations. This is the duty that God has entrusted to parents, a sacred mission to which they must respond. Thus, childhood is not only useful, necessary, and indispensable, but it is also the natural consequence of the laws God has established to govern the universe. Earthly sympathies and antipathies. Can two people who knew each other in a previous existence find each other in another physical existence and recognize one another? No, but they may feel drawn to each other. Often, intimate relationships based on genuine affection have no other cause than this. Two beings are brought together by circumstances that seem fortuitous, but are actually the result of the attraction of two spirits searching for each other through the multitude. Wouldn't it be nicer if they recognized each other? Not always. The memory of past lives would have more drawbacks than you think. After death, spirits will recognize each other and remember the time spent together. Sympathy always has, as its principle, a prior knowledge. Two spirits that adapt to each other naturally seek each other out without having known each other as human beings. The encounters we sometimes have with certain people, which we attribute to chance, are not due to some sort of sympathy. There are connections between thinking beings who do not yet know each other. Magnetism is the guide to this science, which you will understand better later. Where does the instinctive repulsion for certain people at first sight come from, this instinctive antipathy? Insensitive spirits recognize each other without speaking. Instinctive antipathy is always a sign of bad nature. Two spirits are not necessarily bad because they are not sympathetic. Antipathy can arise from a lack of similarity in thought. But as the shadows of differences rise, they fade, and antipathy diminishes. Antipathy between two people first arises in the one whose spirit is less good or more bad than the other. However, the causes and effects are different. A malevolent spirit feels antipathy towards anyone who might judge and unmask it. Upon seeing someone for the first time, it knows it will be disapproved of. Its disgust turns into hatred and jealousy, and it feels the desire to do harm. A good spirit feels a repulsion towards the bad because it knows it will not be understood and does not share the same feelings. But fortified by its superiority, it feels neither resentment nor jealousy towards the other. It merely avoids and pities them. Forgetting the past is a necessity. The incarnated spirit loses memory of its past. A person cannot and should not know everything. God intended it this way in His wisdom. Without the veil that covers certain things, a person would be dazzled, like someone who transitions abruptly from darkness to light. By forgetting the past, a person cannot be held responsible for acts and atone for faults they cannot remember. How can one benefit from experience gained in forgotten lives? Is it conceivable that the tribulations of life serve as a lesson if one recalled what might have caused them? As long as one does not remember, each existence is like the first, and thus one must always start anew. How can this be reconciled with the justice of God? With each new existence, a person acquires more intelligence and can better distinguish between good and evil. Where would be the merit of these lessons if one had to remember the entire past? When a spirit returns to its primitive life, the spiritual life, all its past life unfolds before it. It sees the faults it has committed that are the cause of its suffering, as well as what it could have done to avoid them. It understands that the position assigned to it is just, and then seeks an existence that could repair the one that has just passed. It seeks trials similar to those it has undergone, or struggles it believes necessary for its advancement, and it asks higher spirits to help it with this new task it undertakes. It knows that the spirit assigned as its guide in this new existence will seek to rectify its faults by giving it a kind of intuition of the errors it has made. This same intuition is the thought, the criminal desire that often comes to it and which it instinctively resists, attributing this resistance mostly to principles received from its parents, while it is the voice of conscience speaking to it. This voice is the memory of the past, a voice that warns it not to fall back into the faults it has already committed. The spirit entering this new existence, if it faces these trials with courage and resists them, rises and ascends in hierarchy among the spirits when it returns among them. If we do not have a precise memory during our corporeal life of what we have been and what we have done good or bad in our previous existences, we have an intuition of it, and our instinctive tendencies are a reminiscence of our past, to which our conscience, i.e., the desire we have conceived to avoid committing the same faults, alerts us to resist. In more advanced worlds than ours, where we are not subjected to all our physical needs and pains, these happier beings understand that happiness in general is relative by comparison with a less happy state, even though some of these worlds, despite their superiority over ours, are not yet in a state of perfection. The inhabitants of these worlds must have their own sources of boredom. Among us, the rich, who do not experience the distress of material needs like the poor, still have no less bitter tribulations in life. Now, I ask, do the inhabitants of these worlds believe that they are as unhappy as we are, and do they complain about their fate without having the memory of a lower existence to compare it to? There are two answers to this. There are worlds among those you mention where the inhabitants have a very clear and precise memory of their past existence. They can appreciate and do appreciate the happiness that God allows them to experience. But there are other worlds where the inhabitants, as you say, are in better conditions than ours, yet still face considerable problems and misfortunes. They do not appreciate their happiness any less simply because they do not remember their previous more miserable state. If, as humans, they do not appreciate it, as spirits, they do. Is there not something providential in the forgetting of these past existences, especially when they were painful? Divine wisdom is revealed in higher worlds, where the memory of unhappy existences is nothing more than a bad dream, while in lower worlds, it does not worsen present misfortunes by recalling all past trials. Let us therefore conclude that all that God has done is well done, and that it is not our place to criticize his works or to say how he should have regulated the universe. The memory of our previous individualities would have very serious disadvantages. It could, in some cases, strangely humiliate us, and in others, it could exalt our pride and thus hinder our free will. God has given us only what is necessary and sufficient for our improvement. The voice of conscience and our instinctive tendencies steer us away from what might harm us. Moreover, if we had memory of our past personal deeds, we would also have memory of the deeds of others, and this knowledge could have the most unfortunate effects on social relations. Since we do not always have reasons to glorify our past, it is often fortunate that a veil is cast over it. This is in perfect agreement with the doctrine of the spirits from worlds higher than ours. In those worlds where only goodness reigns, the memory of the past is not painful, which is why we remember our previous existence as we remember what we did the previous day. As for the stay one might have had in lower worlds, as we have said, it is nothing more than a bad dream. We may have some revelations about our previous existences, but not always. Many, however, know what they have been and what they have done, and if they were allowed to reveal it, they would make peculiar revelations about the past. Some people believe they have a vague memory of an unknown past, which appears to them as a fleeting image of a dream that one tries in vain to grasp. Is this idea merely an illusion? Sometimes it is real, but often it is also an illusion against which one should be cautious, as it may result from an overactive imagination. In corporeal existences of a higher nature than ours, the memory of previous existences is more precise. Indeed, as the body becomes less material, one remembers the past better. The memory of the past is clearer for those who inhabit worlds of a higher order. Since human instinctive tendencies are a reminiscence of the past, it follows that studying these tendencies can allow one to know the faults they have committed, without doubt and to a certain extent. But one must take into account the improvement the spirit may have undergone and the changes it has experienced in its wandering state. The current existence may be much better than the previous one, or it may be worse, meaning that a person may commit faults in one existence that they did not in the previous one, depending on their progress. If they cannot withstand the trials, they may be led to new faults that are consequences of the position they have chosen. But in general, these faults indicate rather a stationary state than a regression, as the spirit can advance or stop, but it cannot go backwards. Since the vicissitudes of corporeal life are both an atonement for past faults and trials for the future, it follows that the nature of these vicissitudes can be deduced from the type of previous existence. Very often one is punished where one has sinned. However, this should not become an absolute rule. Instinctive tendencies are a more reliable indicator, as the trials the spirit undergoes concern both the future and the past. Once the term marked by providence for its wandering life is reached, the spirit itself chooses the trials it wants to undergo to accelerate its advancement. That is, the type of existence it deems most appropriate to provide it with the means to progress. If he succeeds, he rises. If he fails, he must start over. It is in each virtue of this freedom that the spirit, in a state of corporeal life, chooses the trials of corporeal life and, in a state of incarnation, decides whether or not to undergo them, and chooses between good and evil. Denying man free will would reduce him to the state of a machine. When a spirit returns to corporeal life, it temporarily loses the memory of its previous existences, as if a veil has hidden it, but sometimes it has a vague awareness of them, and they may even be revealed under certain circumstances. However, it is only through the will of the superior spirits that they are revealed spontaneously with a useful purpose and never to satisfy vain curiosity. Future existences can never be revealed as they depend on how the present existence unfolds and the subsequent choices of the spirit. Forgetting the faults committed is not detrimental to the improvement of a spirit, for even if it does not have a precise memory of them, the knowledge it had in its wandering state and the desire it has conceived to rectify them guide it through intuition and give it the thought to resist evil. This thought is the voice of its conscience, in which it is assisted by the spirits who help it. If he listens to the good inspirations suggested to him, if a person does not know his own deeds committed in previous existences, he can still know the type of fault he has been guilty of and what his dominant character was. It is enough for him to know himself to judge what he has been, not what he is, but his tendencies. The vicissitudes of corporeal life are both an atonement for past faults and a trial for the future. They purify and elevate us, depending on whether we endure them with resignation and without murmuring. The nature of the vicissitudes and trials we undergo can also shed light on what we have been and what we have done, just as here on earth we judge the acts of a criminal by the punishment imposed on him by the law. Thus, man will be punished in his pride by the humiliation of a subordinate existence, the wicked rich and the miser by poverty. The one who was harsh with others will suffer deprivations, the tyrant by slavery, the bad son by the ingratitude of his children, the lazy by forced labor, and so on. The emancipation of the soul, sleep and dreams, spiritual visits between living people, hidden transmission of thought, lethargy, catalepsy, apparent death, somnambulism, ecstasy, and secondary sight are phenomena related to sleep and dreams. The incarnated spirit remains willingly within its corporeal envelope, as if it is questioning whether the prisoner is happy in confinement. The incarnated spirit always aspires to liberation, and the rougher the envelope, the more it desires to be freed from it. The soul rests like the body during sleep, but the spirit is never inactive during this time. The bonds that unite it to the body relax, and no longer needing the body, it travels in space and enters into more direct contact with other spirits. How can we judge the freedom of the spirit during sleep? Through dreams it has the memory of the past and sometimes the prediction of the future. It acquires more power and can communicate with other spirits, whether in this world or the next. Often we say, "I had a strange dream, a horrible dream, but without any plausibility." We are often mistaken. It is a memory of places and things we have seen, which we will see in another existence or at another time. When the body is numbed, the spirit tries to break its chain, searching in the past or the future. Poor humans, how little we know about the most ordinary phenomena of life. We consider ourselves very cultured, yet the most mundane things bewilder us. Faced with a question asked by all children, "What do we do when we sleep? What are dreams?" we remain without an answer. Sleep partially frees the soul from the body. When we sleep, we are momentarily in the state in which we will find ourselves after death. Spirits that quickly free themselves from matter upon death have had an intelligent dream. These spirits, when they sleep, join the society of other beings superior to them, travel, converse, and learn with them, and even work on works they find prepared. Death should teach us once again not to fear death, since we do not die every day, according to the words of a saint. This is true for elevated spirits, but for the masses of people who, upon dying, must remain for long hours in this confusion, in this uncertainty they have been told about. They go either to lower worlds where former affections call them, or in search of pleasures that might be even more base than those they have here, drawing inspiration from doctrines that are even more vile, stagnant, and harmful. than those they profess among their own, and which engender sympathy on earth. It is nothing other than the feeling upon waking that one's heart is close to those with whom one has just spent 8 or 9 hours of happiness or pleasure. This also explains those invincible antipathies. We know in our hearts that these people have a different conscience from ours because we know them without ever having seen them with our own eyes. It also explains indifference, as we do not want to make new friends when we know that we already have other friends who love and appreciate us. In summary, sleep has more influence on your life than one might think. Through the effect of sleep, incarnated spirits are always in contact with the spirit world, and this is what makes it possible for higher spirits to consent to incarnate among humans without too much repulsion. God intended that, during their contact with vice, they could go to the source of goodness, so that they themselves coming to instruct others do not fail. Sleep is the door God has opened to his friends from heaven. It is the recreation after work, awaiting the great liberation, the final liberation that will return them to their true environment. Sleep is the memory of what the spirit has seen during sleep, but it is not always dreamt, because not everything that has been seen is always recalled, or everything that is seen is not fully developed. Often it is merely the memory of the disturbance that accompanies your departure or return, combined with the memory of what has been done or what concerns you in the waking state. Otherwise, how would we explain those absurd dreams that contain both the most hidden and the simplest elements? Evil spirits also use dreams to torment weak and timorous souls. Furthermore, we will soon see that there is another type of dream, as ancient as the one you know but which you are unaware of. The dream of Jeanne, the dream of Jacob, the dream of Jewish prophets, and some Indian seers. This dream is the memory of the soul completely freed from the body of this second life we mentioned earlier. Let us try to distinguish between these two types of dreams in memories, or we risk falling into contradictions and errors that would be fatal for faith. Dreams are the product of the soul's emancipation, made more independent by the suspension of active relational life, hence a kind of indefinite clairvoyance that extends to places farther than those we have ever seen, and sometimes even to other worlds. It is also from this that the memory which brings back to consciousness events that occurred in the present existence or in previous existences originates. The strangeness of the images of what happens or has happened in unknown worlds, mixed with the things of the present world, forms these strange and confused sets that seem devoid of meaning and connection. The incoherence of dreams can also be explained by the gaps created in the incomplete memory of what we saw in a dream. It would be like a story from which sentences or parts have been randomly cut. The remaining fragments, once assembled, would lose all reasonable meaning. Why do we not always remember our dreams? What is called sleep is nothing more than the rest of the body, for the spirit is always in motion. There it regains a bit of its freedom and communicates with those it cherishes, whether in this world or others. But as the body is a heavy and coarse matter, it retains impressions that the spirit has received with difficulty. Indeed, the spirit has not perceived them through the organs of the body. What about the meaning attributed to dreams? Dreams are not true in the sense that seers understand them, for it is absurd to believe that dreaming of such or such a thing foretells such or such an event. They are true in the sense that they present images that are real to the spirit, but often have no relation to what is happening in corporeal life. Often, as we said, it is a memory. Finally, sometimes it can be a premonition of the future if it is permitted, or a vision of what is happening elsewhere at the moment, to which the soul is transported. Do you not have many examples of people appearing in a dream and warning their relatives or friends of what is happening to them? What are these apparitions but the soul or spirit of these people coming to communicate with their own? When one is certain that what one has seen has actually occurred, is it not proof that imagination has nothing to do with it, especially if this thing has not occupied your thoughts at all the previous day? Often we see in dreams things that seem to be omens and do not come true. Where does this come from? They may come true for the spirit, but not for the body, meaning that the spirit sees what it desires because it will encounter it. One must not forget that during sleep, the soul is always more or less under the influence of matter, and thus never fully frees itself from earthly ideas. When one is strongly preoccupied with an idea, everything one sees is related to it. When we see in our dreams living people whom we know perfectly performing acts we do not think about, is it not an effect of pure imagination? What do you know about what they are not thinking about? Their spirit may visit yours as yours may visit theirs, and you do not always know what they are thinking. You often also apply to people you know, and according to your desires, what has occurred or happens in other existences. Is complete sleep necessary for the spirit's emancipation? No. The spirit recovers its freedom when the senses fall asleep and takes advantage of every moment of respite the body allows. As soon as the vital forces are weakened, the spirit frees itself, and the weaker the body, the freer the spirit. Thus, half-sleep, or a mere drowsiness of the senses, often presents the same images as a dream. Sometimes it seems to us that we hear words clearly pronounced inside us, unrelated to what concerns us. Where does this come from? Yes, and sometimes entire sentences, especially when the senses begin to fall asleep. Sometimes it is a faint echo of a spirit that wishes to communicate with you, often in a state that is not yet quite a dream. When we have our eyes closed, we see distinct images, figures of which we capture the most minute details. Is this an effect of vision or imagination? The body being asleep, the spirit seeks to break its chain, transports itself, and sees. If the dream were complete, it would be a true dream. Sometimes during sleep or in the midst of sleep, we have ideas that seem very good and which, despite our efforts to recall them, disappear from memory. Where do these ideas come from? They result from the spirit's freedom as it releases itself and enjoys greater faculties during this time. Often, they are also advice given by other spirits. What use are these ideas and advice if memory is lost and one cannot benefit from them? Sometimes, these ideas belong more to the world of spirits than to the corporeal world, but most of the time, if the body forgets, the spirit remembers, and the idea returns at the necessary moment like an instantaneous inspiration. The incarnated spirit, when free from matter and acting as a spirit, often knows the time of its death, and sometimes it even presumes to know it with great clarity. This is what gives it the intuition of that period in the waking state. Hence, some people can sometimes foresee their death with great precision. The activity of the spirit during the body's rest or sleep can sometimes fatigue the latter, because the spirit clings to the body as a captive balloon clings to a post, and just as the balloon shakes the post, the activity of the spirit reacts on the body and can cause fatigue. Spiritual visits between living people. From the principle of the soul's emancipation during sleep, it seems that we have a dual simultaneous existence, that of the body, which provides us with external relational life, and that of the soul, which provides us with hidden relational life. Is this correct? In the state of emancipation, the life of the body gives way to the life of the soul, but it is not strictly two existences, but two phases of the same existence. Thus, a person does not live doubly. Can two people who know each other visit each other during sleep? Yes, and many others who believe they do not know each other meet and converse. One might have, without knowing it, friends in another country. The act of visiting friends, relatives, acquaintances, or people who might be useful while you sleep is so frequent that you almost realize it every night. What is the purpose of these nocturnal visits if one does not remember them? Often, there remains an intuition upon waking, and this intuition often gives rise to certain ideas that spontaneously emerge without explanation, which are none other than those derived from these encounters. Can a person induce spiritual visits at will? Can they, for example, request during sleep to meet a specific person in spirit, speak to them and say certain things? This is what happens. The person falls asleep, their spirit awakens, and what the person had decided, the spirit often strays from, as the life of the person is little interesting to the spirit when it is free from matter. This is true for people who are already sufficiently elevated. Others spend their spiritual existence differently, devoting themselves to their passions or remaining inactive. Thus it is possible for a spirit, depending on the motive proposed, to visit the people it desires, but the fact that it wishes to do so while awake does not guarantee that it will. Can a number of incarnated spirits gather this way and form assemblies? Undoubtedly. Old or new bonds of friendship are often rekindled in this manner among several spirits who enjoy being together. By old, we mean the bonds of friendship formed in previous existences. Upon waking, we bring with us an intuition of the ideas drawn from these hidden conversations, but the source of which remains unknown to us. If a person believes that one of their friends is dead when they are not, can they meet their spirit and know that they are alive? In such a case, could they intuit it upon waking? As a spirit, they can certainly see and know their fate if it is not imposed on them as a trial. Believing in the death of a friend, will they have a premonition of their existence as they might have a premonition of their death? Hidden transmission of thought. How can the same idea, such as a discovery, occur simultaneously in several places? We have already said that during sleep, spirits communicate with each other. Well, when the body wakes up, the spirit remembers what it has learned, and the person believes they have invented it. Thus, several people can discover the same thing at the same time. When it is said that an idea is in the air, it is a more accurate statement than one might think. Everyone contributes to spreading what is unsuspected. Our spirit often reveals to other spirits, without our knowing it, the object of our concern from the previous day. Can spirits communicate if the body is fully awake? The spirit is not confined in the body like in a box. It radiates around it, which is why it can communicate with other spirits even while awake, though this is more difficult. How is it that two perfectly awake people often have the same thought instantaneously? These are two sympathetic spirits communicating and seeing each other's thoughts. Even when the body is asleep, there is a communication of thoughts between spirits that meet, allowing two people to see and understand each other without needing external language signs. One might say they converse in the language of spirits. Lethargy, catalepsy, apparent death. People in a state of lethargy or catalepsy often have the ability to see and hear what is happening around them, but cannot express it. This happens through the eyes and ears of the body, not through the spirit. The spirit is aware but cannot communicate. Why can it not communicate itself? The state of the body opposes it. This particular state of the organs demonstrates that there is something distinct from the body in a person. The body no longer functions, but the spirit acts. Can a spirit in lethargy entirely separate from its body to give it all the appearances of death and then return to it? In lethargy, the body is not dead because some functions are still performed. Vitality is in a latent state, like in a chrysalis, but not annihilated. The spirit is still united with the body as long as it lives. Once the bonds are broken by true death and the disintegration of the organs, the separation is complete and the spirit no longer returns. When someone who seems dead returns to life, it is because death was not complete. Can we, with appropriate care, renew the bonds that are about to break and restore life to a being who, without help, would have died definitively? Yes, undoubtedly, and you have daily evidence of this. Magnetism is often a powerful means in this case because it restores to the body the vital fluid it lacks and which was insufficient to maintain the functioning of the organs. Lethargy and catalepsy share the same principle, a temporary loss of sensitivity and movement due to a physiological or inexplicable cause. They differ in that in lethargy, the suspension of vital forces is general and gives the body all the appearances of death. In catalepsy, it is localized and can affect a more or less extensive part of the body, allowing intelligence to manifest, which prevents it from being confused with death. Lethargy is always natural. Catalepsy is sometimes spontaneous, but can be artificially induced and removed by magnetic action. Sleepwalking. Does natural sleepwalking have anything to do with dreams? How can it be explained? It is a more complete independence of the soul from sleep, and its faculties are then more developed. It has perceptions that sleep, being an imperfect state of sleepwalking, does not possess. In sleepwalking, the spirit is entirely to itself. The material organs, like in catalepsy, no longer receive external impressions. This state mainly manifests during sleep, a time when the spirit can temporarily abandon the body, which then rests as needed for matter. When sleepwalking occurs, it is because the spirit, preoccupied with one thing or another, is engaged in an action requiring the use of its body, which it then uses analogously, as in physical manifestation phenomena or even written communications. In the dreams we are aware of, the organs, including those of memory, begin to awaken. They imperfectly receive the impressions produced by external objects or causes and communicate them to the spirit, which, being at rest, perceives only confused and often disjointed sensations, without apparent reason for their existence, mixed with vague memories, whether from this existence or previous ones. It is then easy to understand why sleepwalkers have no memory, and why dreams that are remembered often make no sense. I say most of the time because sometimes they result from a precise memory of events from a previous life, and sometimes even from a kind of intuition of the future. Does so-called magnetic sleepwalking have anything to do with natural sleepwalking? It is the same thing, except that it is induced. What is the nature of what is called magnetic fluid, vital fluid, or animal electricity? All are modifications of the universal fluid. What is the cause of sleepwalking clairvoyance? As we have said, it is the soul that sees. How can the sleepwalker see through opaque bodies? We have said that matter is not an obstacle for the spirit, which passes freely through it. It is often said that he sees through the forehead, the knee, etc., because you, being entirely in matter, do not understand how one can see without the help of organs. The spirit, by desire, believes it needs these organs, but if it were free, it would understand that it sees through all parts of the body, or better yet, that it sees outside its body. Since the clairvoyance of the sleepwalker is that of their soul or spirit, why do they not see everything, and why do they often make mistakes? You know very well that they still participate in their errors and prejudices, and when they are attached to matter, they do not enjoy all their faculties as a spirit. God gave this faculty to man for a useful and serious purpose, not to teach him what he should not know. That is why sleepwalkers cannot say everything. What is the source of the sleepwalkers' ideas, and how can they speak accurately about things they do not know in their waking state, even beyond their intellectual capacity? It happens that the sleepwalker has more knowledge than you do, but it remains dormant because their physical envelope is too imperfect to retain it. But what are they, fundamentally? Like us, a spirit incarnated in matter to accomplish its mission, and the state they enter awakens them from this lethargy. We have often told you that we live one existence after another. This change materially causes them to lose what they might have learned in a previous existence. By entering the state called a crisis, they remember, but not always completely. They know but cannot say where this knowledge comes from or how they possess it. Once the crisis is over, all memory fades and returns to oblivion. Experience shows that sleepwalkers also receive communications from other spirits who convey what they need to say and supplement their insufficiency. This is particularly evident in medical prescriptions, where the sleepwalker's spirit sees the illness and another indicates the remedy. This dual action sometimes manifests and reveals itself through frequent expressions such as, "I am told to say," or "I am forbidden to say such and such a thing." In the latter case, there is always a danger of insisting to obtain a revelation that has been rejected, as this then gives advantage to frivolous spirits who speak about everything without scruples and without concern for the truth. How can we explain remote vision in some sleepwalkers? Does the soul not transport itself during sleep? The same applies to sleepwalking. The more or less developed clairvoyance of a sleepwalker is due to the physical organization or the nature of the incarnated spirit. There are physical dispositions that allow the spirit to more or less physically free itself from matter. The faculties enjoyed by the sleepwalker are the same as those enjoyed by the spirit after death to some extent, as one must account for the influence of matter to which it remains attached. Can a sleepwalker see other spirits? Most can see them very well. It depends on the degree and nature of their lucidity, but sometimes they do not realize at first and mistake them for corporeal beings. This mostly happens to those who have no knowledge of spiritism because they do not yet understand the essence of spirits. What surprises and makes them doubt is that they do not believe in living beings. The same effect occurs at the time of death for those who still believe they are alive. Nothing around them seems to change. Spirits appear to have bodies like ours and take the appearance of their own body for a real body. Does the sleepwalker who sees remotely see from the point where their body is, or from where their soul is? Why this question, since it is the soul that sees and not the body? Given that it is the soul that transports itself, how can the sleepwalker experience in their body the sensations of heat or cold from the place where their soul is, which is sometimes very far from their body? The soul has not yet completely abandoned the body. It still clings to it by the link that unites it to the body. This link conducts sensations. When two people correspond from one city to another via electricity, it serves as a link between their thoughts. This is why they communicate as if they were side by side. The use a sleepwalker makes of their faculty influences the state of their spirit after death, just as the good or bad use of all the faculties given to man by God. Ecstasy. What is the difference between ecstasy and sleepwalking? It is a more purified form of sleepwalking. The soul of the ecstatic is even more independent. The spirit of the ecstatic actually enters higher worlds. Yes, it sees them and understands the happiness of those who are there. That is why they would like to stay there, but there are worlds inaccessible to spirits that are not sufficiently purified. When the ecstatic expresses the desire to leave Earth, they speak sincerely and are not hindered by the instinct of self-preservation. This depends on the degree of purification of the spirit. If it sees that its future position is better than its current life, it strives to break the bonds that tie it to Earth. If the ecstatic stayed, could their soul leave their body forever? Yes, it could die. That is why they must be reminded of everything that can keep them here, and especially made to understand that if they were to break the chain that holds them here, it would be the true way to avoid staying where they see they would be happy. There are things the ecstatic claims to see that are obviously the product of an imagination affected by earthly beliefs and prejudices. What they see is real to them, but as their spirit is still under the influence of earthly ideas, they may see it in their own way, or, better yet, express it in a language suited to their prejudices, and the ideas with which they have been lulled or those of others to better understand, which can lead to errors. What degree of trust can we place in the revelations of ecstatics? The ecstatic can be very often mistaken, especially when they attempt to penetrate what must remain a mystery to man, as they are then guided by their own ideas and become the plaything of deceiving spirits who exploit their enthusiasm to fascinate them. What consequences can be drawn from the phenomena of sleepwalking and ecstasy? Are they not a form of initiation into future life, or rather into the past and future lives that a person glimpses? Those who study these phenomena may find the solution to more than one mystery that reason seeks in vain to penetrate. Can the phenomena of sleepwalking and ecstasy be compatible with materialism? One who studies this phenomenon in good faith and without prejudice cannot be either a materialist or an atheist. Second sight. Does the phenomenon known as second sight have anything to do with dreams and sleepwalking? All these phenomena are essentially the same. What is called second sight is the soul being more free, even though the body is not asleep. Second sight is the vision of the soul. Second sight is permanent, the faculty of yes, the exercise in worlds less material than your own. Spirits free themselves more easily and communicate through mere thought, without excluding articulated language. Thus, double vision is best seen as a permanent faculty. Its normal state can be compared to that of lucid sleepwalkers, and that is also why those incarnated in coarser bodies manifest more easily. Second sight develops spontaneously or through the will of the person who possesses it. Most often it is spontaneous, but willpower also plays a role. For example, consider certain people called seers, some of whom possess this power, and you will see that it is willpower that helps them enter into this second sight and what you call vision. It is likely that second sight develops through exercise. Yes, work always brings progress, and the veil covering things becomes clearer. This ability is due to physical organization. Certainly organization plays a role, but there are organizations that revolt against it. Second sight seems to be hereditary in some families, with a similarity of organization passed down like other physical qualities, and then the development of the faculty through a kind of education also passed from one to another. It is true that certain circumstances develop second sight. Illness, approaching danger, or a great mission can develop it. The body is sometimes in a special state that allows the spirit to see what it cannot see with the body's eyes. Moments of crisis and calamity, great emotions and all causes that excite the mind sometimes provoke the development of second sight. It seems that providence in the face of danger gives us means to avert it. All persecuted sects and parties offer many examples of this. Are people with second sight always aware of it? It is not always something natural for them, and many believe that if everything is observed, everything should be the same. We could attribute to a kind of second sight the insight of certain people who, without having anything extraordinary, judge things with more precision than others. It is always the soul that radiates more freely and judges better than under the veil of matter. This faculty, in some cases, does it give a prior recognition of things? Yes, it also gives premonitions, as there are several degrees in this faculty, and the same subject may have all the degrees, or only a few. Theoretical summary of sleepwalking, ecstasy and second sight. The phenomena of natural sleepwalking occur spontaneously and are independent of any known external cause. But in some people with special constitutions, they can be artificially induced through the action of magnetism. The state known as magnetic sleepwalking differs from natural sleepwalking only in that it is induced, while the latter is spontaneous. Natural sleepwalking is a well-known fact that no one would think of contesting, despite the wonderful phenomena it presents. So, what is extraordinary or irrational about magnetic sleepwalking? Because it is artificially produced. Like many other things, it is said that charlatans have exploited it, which is all the more reason not to leave it in their hands. But in the meantime, like natural sleepwalking, it is a fact, and as there is no reasoning against a fact, it is recognized despite the unwillingness of some, and this within science itself, where it enters through a multitude of small doors rather than the main one. For Spiritism, sleepwalking is more than a physiological phenomenon. It is a light shed on psychology. It is here that the soul can be studied, as it is revealed. One of the phenomena that characterize it is the clairvoyance independent of ordinary organs of sight. Those who dispute this fact base their arguments on the fact that the sleepwalker does not always see at will, like with their eyes. It is not surprising that, since the means are different, the effects are not the same. It is rational to expect identical effects when the instrument no longer exists. The soul has its properties just as the eye has its own. They must be judged in themselves and not by analogy. The cause of the clairvoyance of both magnetic and natural sleepwalkers is the same. It is an attribute of the soul, a faculty inherent in all parts of the incorporeal being within us, and which has no other limits than those assigned to the soul itself. It sees where its soul can travel no matter the distance. In distant vision, the sleepwalker does not see things from the point where their body is located, but as if through a telescopic effect, they see things as if they were on sight, because their soul is actually there. This is why their body seems almost annihilated and appears sensationless until the soul resumes control. This partial separation of the soul from the body is an abnormal state that can last for more or less time, but not indefinitely. It is due to the fatigue that the body experiences after a certain period, especially when the soul is engaged in active work. The soul's or spirit's vision is not confined and does not have a defined location, which explains why sleepwalkers cannot attribute it to any special organ. They see because they see without knowing why or how, since vision does not have a specific focal point for them. As a spirit, they refer to their body. This focal point seems to be in the centers where vital activity is greatest, primarily in the brain, in the epigastric region, or in the organ they consider the most persistent connection between spirit and body. The power of sleepwalking lucidity is not infinite. A spirit, even when completely free, is limited in its faculties and knowledge according to the degree of perfection it has attained, and it is even more so when bound to matter under its influence. This is why sleepwalking clairvoyance is neither universal nor infallible. Its infallibility is much less reliable when it deviates from the purpose nature intended and becomes an object of curiosity and experimentation. In the state of liberation in which the sleepwalker's spirit finds itself, it more easily communicates with other spirits, embodied or not. Communication established through the contact of the fluids that make up the perispirit, and serve as a transmission of thought, like electricity. The sleepwalker, therefore, does not need to articulate their thoughts through speech. They feel and intuit them. This makes them highly impressionable and susceptible to the influences of the moral atmosphere in which they find themselves. This is also why a large number of spectators, and especially the more or less ill-intentioned curious, are essentially detrimental to the development of their faculties, which retract, so to speak, into themselves and only fully unfold in their intimate and sympathetic environment. The presence of malevolent or unsympathetic individuals produces an effect similar to touching something sensitive. The sleepwalker sees both their own spirit and their body. They are, so to speak, two beings representing for them the dual spiritual and corporeal existence, yet they are intertwined by the bonds that unite them. The sleepwalker is not always aware of this situation, and this duality often makes them speak of themselves as if they were talking about a stranger. That is, sometimes it is the corporeal being speaking to the spiritual being, and sometimes it is the spiritual being speaking to the corporeal being. The spirit acquires more knowledge and experience with each corporeal existence, partially forgets it during its incarnation in the material world, which is too coarse, but recalls it as a spirit. This is how some sleepwalkers reveal knowledge beyond their level of education and even their apparent intellectual capacities. The intellectual and scientific inferiority of the sleepwalker in the waking state prejudices us. Indeed, the knowledge they can reveal in the lucid state, depending on the circumstances and the goals they set, may come from their own experience of clairvoyance of present things or the advice they receive from other spirits. But, as their own spirit may be more or less advanced, they may express things more or less accurately. Through the phenomena of sleepwalking, whether natural or magnetic, Providence offers us irrefutable proof of the existence and independence of the soul and allows us to witness the sublime spectacle of its emancipation when the sleepwalker describes what is happening at a distance. It is evident that they see what is happening not through the body's eyes, but by seeing themselves there and feeling transported there. So, there is something of themselves there, and this something not being their body can only be their soul or spirit. While man delves into the subtleties of an abstract and unintelligible metaphysics to seek the causes of our moral existence, God places before our eyes and within our grasp the simplest and most evident means for the study of experimental psychology on a daily basis. Ecstasy is the state in which the independence of the soul and body is most visibly manifested and becomes, in a certain way, palpable. In dreams and in sleepwalking, the soul wanders through the earthly worlds. In ecstasy, it enters an unknown world, that of ethereal spirits with whom it communicates, although it cannot go beyond certain limits that it cannot cross without completely breaking the bonds that tie it to the body. It is surrounded by an entirely new and resplendent state, enchanted by unknown harmonies on earth. It is imbued with an indefinable sensation of well-being, already enjoying heavenly happiness. And one can say that it is stepping onto the threshold of eternity. In the state of ecstasy, the annihilation of the body is almost complete. It has, so to speak, only organic life left, and it seems that the soul is connected only by a thread that any further effort would sever irreversibly. In this state, all earthly thoughts disappear, making way for pure feeling, which is the very essence of our immaterial being, fully devoted to this sublime contemplation. The ecstatic sees life only as a temporary stage. For them, the goods and evils, joys and coarse miseries of this world are merely subtle incidents in a journey they look forward to ending. Their lucidity can be more or less perfect, and their spirit, depending on its level of elevation, is also more or less capable of knowing and understanding things. Sometimes their exaltation is greater than their true lucidity, or more precisely, their exaltation impairs their lucidity, which is why their revelations are often a mix of truths and errors, sublime things and absurd, even ridiculous ones. Inferior spirits often take advantage of this exaltation, which is always a source of weakness when not controlled, to dominate the ecstatic and impose appearances that keep them within the ideas or prejudices of the previous day. This is an obstacle, but not all are the same. It is up to us to judge coolly and weigh their revelations on the scale of reason. The emancipation of the soul sometimes manifests in the waking state and produces the phenomenon known as second sight, which gives those endowed with it the ability to see, hear, and feel beyond the limits of our senses. They perceive absent things where the soul extends its action. They see them, so to speak, through ordinary sight, and as if through a sort of mirage. At the moment the phenomenon of second sight occurs, the physical state changes noticeably. The eye appears vague, it looks without seeing. The entire physiognomy reflects a kind of exaltation. The organs of sight are foreign to it, as vision persists despite the occlusion of the eyes. This faculty seems to those who possess it as natural as sight itself. For them, it is an attribute of their being that does not appear as an exception. Most of the time, forgetfulness follows this temporary lucidity, with its memory, increasingly vague, eventually fading away like that of a dream. The power of second sight ranges from a vague sensation to a clear perception of present or absent things. In its rudimentary state, it gives certain people a sense, insight, and a kind of certainty in their actions, which could be called the precision of moral sight. More developed, it awakens premonitions. Even more developed, it shows events that have occurred or are about to occur. Natural and artificial sleepwalking, ecstasy, and second sight are merely varieties or modifications of the same cause. These phenomena, like dreams, are inherent in nature. That is why they have existed since time immemorial. History shows us that they have been known and even exploited since the most distant antiquity, and we find in them the explanation for a multitude of facts that prejudices have caused to be considered supernatural.